Well, I have some exciting news. A member of our parish family, Matthew Abraham, has been accepted into candidacy for the permanent diaconate. So, God willing, he will be ordained a permanent deacon for our parish 3 years from now, 2025. I know, that seems like a long time. The preparation for the diaconate is almost as extensive as it is for the priesthood. And there again, that's because the person is ordained into the clergy. So, but we are grateful that God has called him to this and that he has answered yes, and we'll be celebrating a few of the steps along the way. You know, the beautiful thing about the diaconate is that deacons are ordained to serve. That's kind of their calling, as I know Deacon Jim would agree with. The idea of service is the one that I'd kind of like to talk about today. So we have this miracle that Jesus performs at the wedding in Cana, and it is probably one of the more famous of his miracles. If you just asked someone, just off the street, name 5 miracles of Jesus, they'd go walking on water and maybe the transfiguration, maybe the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. But I have a feeling that changing water into wine would be up there in the top 5. Now, what are the circumstances that lead to this wonderful miracle? Well, we are told that at this wedding, the couple has run out of wine. Now, to begin with, that was kind of a social faux pas in that day and time. That was a pretty important part of the wedding ceremony or the wedding tradition. And again, we don't have to, I know I've counseled enough engaged couples to know that they want everything to go right with their wedding. They wouldn't want the tiniest detail to not go well. And here was something that was kind of big or major. But it wasn't, God will do this for me. That's pretty interesting because let me play that out for you. What does she do? She comes to Jesus and says, very simply, a fact, they don't have any more wine. Jesus' response to her is, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come. Now, what is Mary's response to that? Nothing to Jesus. She doesn't argue her case. She doesn't try and make her point. She's not going to beg and plead. She just goes over to the waiters and says, do whatever he tells you. Now, Jesus could have gone over to the waiters and said, yep, sorry, nothing I'm going to do here. Appreciate it, yep, but I've got other things to worry about. But I suspect what happened was, as Jesus paused for a moment, he heard the Father's voice in his head say, son, do this for your mother. And so he goes over to the waiters and says, fill these jars full of water. And of course, the head waiter tastes the water turned to wine and realizes this is the best wine, which I have to admit probably would have created some confusion in the bride and groom, wouldn't it? When they come and say, why'd you hold back the best wine? We didn't hold anything back. We were trying to get it all out there. But in this first miracle that Jesus performs, he is performing it as a service, and not just in the sense that he does this kindness for this couple, which again is what Jesus did in a lot of his miracles. His miracles were bringing joy to people. But it's in the fact that he is at service to the love between a husband and wife. We as Catholic Christians understand that this moment transforms marriage for us. Marriage is no longer just a social convention. no longer just a legal contract. Marriage becomes a blessed event. Marriage becomes a sacrament, a moment of grace. That is God truly being of service to humanity, that through our unions of men and women, we receive the gift of God's own life, that is grace. So that's the theological effect of this transformation of water into wine. It transforms also the nature of marriage for us. Which leads me to that vocation. You know, it's not just the priesthood or the diaconate as vocations that are called to service. I believe that the vocation of married life is about being called to the service of one another. It is about placing one's gifts at the disposal of your spouse. Now, that's an important distinction because I fear too often young people in marriage today go into marriage with the notion of, well, I hope I'm happy. I hope I get everything out of this. They're looking to themselves first. Whereas truly the proper attitude going into marriage is, can I make this other person happy? What can I do to make this other person fulfilled in the marriage covenant? That difference of perspective is what leads to truly happy marriages. Because as we are told in the scriptures today, and there's a reason the church nestles this gospel, this miracle of Jesus in with these other readings, we are told, for example, as in the St. Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, talking about the spiritual gift. He says, there are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different forms of service, but the same Lord. There are different workings, but the same God who produces all of them in everyone. And this is the truth of married life as well. It is about what you bring into the marriage in service of the other that makes marriage so beautiful. And in our first reading from the prophet Isaiah, speaking of the Lord, he says, as a young man marries a virgin, your builder shall marry you, and as a bridegroom rejoices in his bride, so shall your God rejoice in you. So what we are seeing there is the prophet using marriage as a kind of analogy to God's love for us. In the same way that two people, a man and woman, come together and share their love for each other, show their love for each other, witness their love to each other, that is a reflection of God's love. And that is something that the church echoes. To the extent that married couples, married individuals love each other, they become a mirror of God's love to the world. They show to everyone, family, friends, community, to the world, that God loves us. He loves us because he transformed marriage into a sacrament. He loves us because he's of service to that couple who marry, helping them in their life together if they, in faith, call upon him to do so, as Mary, in faith, called upon her son to help that married couple in Cana in Galilee. So all these gifts that we are given, I think, fundamentally change or transform the way we look at marriage. Marriage is a covenant, not a contract, not a convention. It is a partnership of the whole of life. That's the way the church understands it. That's the reality and truth of it. And therefore, all one's gifts are poured out into making a good marriage. So, here again, whether it is as members of the clergy, whether it is as members of a faith community, whether it is as a couple living out the marriage covenant, we are of service to others. Service is the very nature of what we are about. It is sharing our gifts with one another. The opposite of that, self-centeredness, being withdrawn, keeping our gifts and talents to ourselves, that is the death of anything. That is the death of a vocation. That is the death of a marriage. That would be the death of a parish. But we are fortunate that so many, indeed most all, give of themselves